Good morning, and thank you for tuning in to the morning devotion here at Mount Gilead Church. My name's Mike Bridgewater, and today I get the privilege to give you the devotion. I'm the operations director here at the church, and this morning it's going to be a kind of a light devotion. And we're going to be spending some time in John chapter 7 and chapter 8. But first off, though, I wanted to give you a somewhat useless piece of information. And did you know that on September 14th of the year 1205, that was the last time there was a total solar eclipse here in central Indiana? At that time in history, the Crusades were going on, and the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. Back in August of 2017, you might remember that there was a solar eclipse that transversed the country, started in Oregon and went all the way to South Carolina. And it cut through part of Kentucky and Illinois, and there was a lot of news about it, and a lot of people traveled down to see it. And I went down to see the eclipse and got this picture of the total solar eclipse, and it was pretty cool to experience totality and totality is when you're covered by 100% of the moon's shadow, and when you're only covered by 99% of the moon's shadow, that's still 10,000 times brighter than the full moon. So being in totality is a unique experience, and the next solar eclipse that's going to be happening in central Indiana is coming up in just a few years, and that's in April of 2024. And who knows, by that time, they might have the bridge finished at State Road 144 and 67. So the shadow of the moon is about 100 miles wide, and it will be going pretty close to Mooresville, and Mooresville will get to experience about 3 minutes and 50 seconds of totality. If you wanted to get an extra 15 seconds of totality, you could travel down a little closer to Martinsville or over towards Franklin, and Franklin will be right on the center line of totality, and they'll get about 4 minutes and 5 seconds of totality. So there's some information about some light, and I wanted to talk today about John chapter 7 and 8. And one of my favorite things about the book of John is in chapter 20, verse 30, John tells us specifically why he wrote this gospel and the purpose of his gospel. And he says, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." In the first few verses of chapter 7, though, John gives us some tidbits of what Jesus is challenged with, what challenges Jesus is facing. First off, we learn that the Jews are seeking to kill him, and that secondly, it's the Feast of the Tabernacles is getting ready to take place. So it's harvest time, and Jesus is about 7 months away from setting his face towards Jerusalem and facing the cross and crucifixion. And it also tells us an interesting thing about his brothers, that his brothers were kind of pestering him and egging him on. And Kent's being really loud right now out in the hallway. But anyway, and making requests of him, and they did not believe on his name at that time. So Jesus eventually goes in secret up to the Feast of Tabernacles, and he arrives about midway through the feast and enters the temple and starts to teach. Unfortunately, though, John doesn't go into any details surrounding the feast or what Jesus was teaching about. So what is the Feast of Tabernacles, or also known as the Feast of Booths? In short, it was one of the three main feasts that the Jews had. They had Passover feast, they had the Pentecost feast, and they had the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you go back into Leviticus chapter 23, you can read about this feast, and it says, this feast took place in the fall and coincided with harvest. It says in Leviticus 23:42, it says, "You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And there were four main elements to this feast that took place over a week. The first being the Israelites were basically camping out. If you lived in Jerusalem, you were to set up a tent or a booth outside of your house and live in that tent for that week. And that was to commemorate their wandering through the desert after their miraculous exodus from Egypt. The second thing was the increased number of sacrifices. It was the harvest feast, so they had basically 2 times the sacrifices that they would have given at the Passover feast. The third was a very elaborate water drawing ceremony where the priests would come out and go to the pool of Shalom, and they would get water, and then they would have this huge procession back to the temple, and they would pour out this water onto the altar. And the fourth element was the lighting of these 4 very large candelabras, and they were like 75 feet tall, and there was 4 of them, and they basically provided light for all of Jerusalem when they were lit up. So you would see these things from very far away. So it was with this backdrop and all this tradition and all this pageantry that Jesus stands up on the last day of the feast and says, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." And then on the next day makes one of the I am statements in the book of John. And he says, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." Telling all that are there that he is the one who fulfills the purpose and the meaning of this festival. But what happens is, in both cases, is very interesting. The religious leaders of the time, the Pharisees and the officers of the chief priests, they don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Instead, they just want to get into an argument with him, and they want to question him and just have a battle of words with him. But not all is lost, because it's very interesting in John chapter 8 and verses 30 and 31, because there were some Jews that believed on him. And it says, "As he spoke these words, many believed on him. Then Jesus said to the Jews who believed him, 'If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed.'" And that's the mission that we have as believers of Jesus, is to continue to become lifelong disciples of Jesus. In simple terms, a disciple is a learner and a faithful follower of the teachings of Jesus. I would encourage you today to do some self-study on the book of John and review all 23 times where he refers to himself with "I am." Some of those passages will be very familiar, like "I am the good shepherd," "I am the bread of life," or "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I'll post all these verses in the comments so you can look them up. Have a great Monday, and share the light of the world, which is Jesus, with somebody today. Thank you.